Hello students, welcome back to our channel Path to JRF. I am Quazi Ma'am, your teacher for UGC-NET Paper 2 English. Now, as you know that currently we are running a series on history of English literature, mane British history ro pore. Before that, I had already taken a few classes on linguistics. So, if you are new to this channel, if you haven't watched those videos yet, please go and watch them. Currently, we are running free classes for UGC-NET English literature aspirants so that you can get the maximum benefits out of it. Now, last class we were talking about the Anglo-Saxon age. So, if we go chronologically, the next age after the Anglo-Saxon age is the Anglo-Norman age. Anglo-Saxon age er pore kon age ashe? British history te Anglo-Norman age. So, our today's class, as you can see on the screen, is on the Anglo-Norman age. So, if you like the class, please give it, click the like button and also share it with your friends. And those who are watching us for the first time, please do subscribe the channel so that you get all the notification whenever we come live or take a class. Now, what were we discussing about in our last class? Anglo-Saxon age amra ki ki porechi. We not only talked about the history of English literature, but we also talked about the history of English language, how English as a language evolved from nothing, and also how England evolved as a distinct country. Because before that, different tribes, other European tribes were ruling over England. England did not have a ruler of their own. We have seen that by 410 to 450 AD, the Romans had already left England, because before that, England was being ruled by the Romans. Then who comes? The different Germanic tribe, Anglo-Saxon tribes come. So, now we can see that English is slowly emerging both as a country and as a language. Last class we had seen the influence of the various European language on English. Bibhinno European language golor English er opore ki probhab pore segulo amra ager din alochona korechi. The influence of German language, the influence of the Nordic language, the language of the Vikings, then the influence of Latin. So, all these together help English to become a language of their own. Now, when we study the Anglo-Norman age, the first question which arises in our mind is what led to the transition? হঠাৎ করে এক রাতে একটা নতুন এজ আসতে পারে না, but we have to choose a date. Any change happens gradually. It takes time for change, but still, to make our studying easier, we have to choose a date. Why is 1066 chosen for the transition? Because we have seen, or England witnessed the Battle of Hastings in 1066 AD. And England, or the Anglo-Saxons, were defeated by the people, by the French people who came from Normandy. So, as you can see the screen, the Anglo-Norman period in English literature involves the literary sensibilities and literary works that was being written in England during the year 1066 to 1300 CE. So, একটা জিনিস আমার মাথায় ক্লিয়ার হলো যে Anglo-Norman age starts by 1066 AD and it lasts roughly till 1300 AD. Why? Because 1300 AD is again a very important date because it again marks a change. Why? Because we assume that in 1340 a famous personality was born who was named Geoffrey Chaucer. As students of English literature, we know how important Chaucer is. Chaucer needs to be studied in a very different and separate class. He is so much important that the age itself is named after him. We study this particular age as the age of Chaucer. So, Anglo-Saxon literature is studied or it is categorized under Old English literature. And we consider Anglo-Norman literature to be Middle English literature. Why? Now, Middle English literature is an umbrella term and it is a long time. Anglo-Norman age is only a part of it. Remember this? যে Anglo-Norman age টা কিন্তু Middle English এর একটা পার্ট মাত্র. Middle English এর মধ্যে কি কি আমরা ফেলতে পারি? ফার্স্ট তো অবশ্যই Anglo-Norman ফেলা যাবে. What happens after that? What comes after that? The age of Chaucer. Age of Chaucer টাকেও এমন ভাবে ডিভাইড করা যায় যে age before Chaucer, during Chaucer and after Chaucer. So, কিছুটা age before Chaucer will come under your Anglo-Norman age. So, you can understand that age of Chaucer. You also have the age of transition. Age of transition. So, after that, after this Middle English age, you will see or you will witness the famous Renaissance. So, till the starting of the Renaissance, you can consider it as Middle English period, starting from the Anglo-Norman age. Now, in 1066 AD, what marks the start of the Anglo-Norman age? We know that in this year the Battle of Hastings took place. The Battle of Hastings took place. Where the Duke of Normandy, William the Conqueror, he was the Duke of Normandy. He defeated the last Anglo-Saxon king, Harold Godwinson. Defeated Harold Godwinson. Harold Godwinson was the Anglo-Saxon king. So this marks the end of the Anglo-Saxon era and the beginning of the Anglo-Norman era. Now, who were the Normans? From where did they came? Why were they called Normans? They were called Normans. They came to England and they started living with the Anglo-Saxons. That's why they became Anglo-Normans. Normans were people coming from a place called Normandy, which was a part of France. So, first during the Anglo-Saxon era or before it, we have seen the influence of Romans. After that, we see Anglo-Saxons coming in, so it's the influence of Germany. And you have the influence of the Scandinavian countries as well, because you have the Vikings attacking repeatedly. And now you can see the influence of French finally. and this will be a strong influence and a lasting one. So these Anglo-Normans are coming from a place called Normandy, which is situated in France. And the term Norman is derived from the word Norseman. These Normans arrived in England after William the Conqueror defeated Harold Godwinson in the Battle of Hastings on 14th October 1066 CE. So this information is very important for you to know, both for your UGC-NET also, and if you are still pursuing your graduation or masters, it is important for your subject as well. Next, what is the Anglo-Norman period about? Understanding Anglo-Norman period in English literature requires a clear knowledge about the statuses of language in England during the medieval age. With the arrival of the Norman French, Anglo-Norman England became a country of 4 languages. Jei muhurte Anglo-Norman ra England elo. Again, because it is French influence, a foreign rule again, so you will see some changes in the culture, in the language, and in your overall society as well. Atokhon, during the Anglo-Saxon era, which language was developing? The English language, Old English language was developing at a very fast rate. Jehetu Romans have left, and with the which language did the Romans bring with themselves? Latin. Romans der chole jawar shathe shathe Latin was still there. Definitely it was there. It was the language of the church, of the clergy. But still, when they left, the native or original language of England started to develop very rapidly. But once again, when the French people are coming, they bring with them their culture and their language. So we see a very much rise in the use of the French language. So much so that during the Anglo-Norman era, French becomes the official language of the courts, the parliaments, the schools, and everywhere. And again, you will see that English language which was rapidly growing during the Anglo-Saxon era, it again had faced a setback. Why? Because during the Anglo-Norman era, English was being used, but only by the common people of England, the poor people. The churchmen, the clergy were still speaking in Latin, so it was a very prestigious language. এই মুহূর্তে আমরা যেমন সংস্কৃতটাকে ভাবি, সংস্কৃত সাধারণ মানুষ জানে না, it is a prestigious language. It is used when we talk about religion. Similarly, during that time in England, Latin had the same position. It was only known by the clergymen, the people of the church, and they used this language. The nobility, the ruling class, they were speaking in French, and only the poor common people of England, they were speaking in English. Now another language was very much prevalent besides English, that was Celtic. Now you know that this is a language which is spoken in Ireland. So the common people of Ireland and other regions, they were speaking Celtic. Again, this was also a language spoken by the common people. So which 2 languages were ruling? Latin and French. And English had seen, which was rapidly growing during the Anglo-Saxon era, it again saw a setback. And what happened during the Anglo-Saxon age? In last class, when we were talking about the Anglo-Saxon heptarchy, 7 kingdoms within England, we saw that each region had its own dialect of English, and because English was rising or gaining importance as a language, the different dialects of English, they were having a very competitive rivalry with each other. একটা ভাষা যখন সেটা অনেক উন্নতি করছে আর সেটার ইম্পর্টেন্স ধীরে ধীরে বাড়ছে, তখন কোন ডায়ালেক্টটা সব থেকে বেশি ইম্পর্টেন্ট বা কোন ডায়ালেক্টটাকে আমি স্ট্যান্ডার্ড ইংলিশ বলে ধরবো সেটারও একটা যুদ্ধ শুরু হয়ে যায়। কিন্তু যখন অ্যাংলো নর্মান এজে ইংলিশের আর সেই রকম উন্নতি থাকলো না বা ইম্পর্টেন্স থাকলো না, তখন এই যে ডায়ালেক্টের মধ্যে যে রাইভালরি সেটাও কমে গেল, বিকজ সাধারণ মানুষই তো সেই ভাষায় কথা বলছে। Like during the reign of King Alfred, what was he doing? He was promoting translation of these all important texts from other European languages to English. So English er kon dialect e ami translation ta korbo, that was a race. But ei muhurte jokhon English abar সেই ইম্পর্টেন্ট পজিশনটা হারিয়ে ফেলেছে, তখন আমার বিভিন্ন ডায়ালেক্টের মধ্যে যে রেষারেষিটা হচ্ছিল সেটাও কমে গেল। Again, during the age of Chaucer, when the Anglo-Norman age is over, during the age of Chaucer, again we will see that English starts gaining importance once again, because by 1366 you see again the language of instruction in the courts and parliaments changing once again back to English. Keep this in mind that the dialect which Chaucer chose as his medium of instruction or medium of writing was the East Midland dialect. This is a very important question for your UGC-NET exam, and you can again expect this question. Anglo-Norman age English er prominence ta onektai kome jacche. Again in the age of Chaucer, during Chaucer's time, you see English becoming importance one again, so much so that various critics are of the opinion that Chaucer was the personality who found English a dialect, and when he left writing or he died, it was a standard language. And the dialect which Chaucer chose to write in was the East Midland dialect of English. East Midland dialect of English. Please note this information down, because this is very important for your NET exam. We will talk about Chaucer in details in another class, but for today, keep this information at the back of your mind. So what was the status of English during the Anglo-Norman period? With the arrival of the Norman French, English no longer remained the language of the court or that of aristocracy. এতক্ষণ যেটা বলছিলাম, সেই মুহূর্তে ফ্রেঞ্চ কালচার এবং ভাষা ইংল্যান্ডে এন্টার করলো, ইংলিশ যেটার ইম্পর্টেন্স আস্তে আস্তে বাড়ছিল সেটা আবার কিছু সময়ের জন্য দাঁড়িয়ে গেল। So it had seen a setback. It was replaced by the Norman French. So what happened? Norman French, again French is also a language, so there will be many dialects of French. So আমরা কোন ফ্রেঞ্চটা নিয়ে concerned? We are concerned with Norman French, which came to England. So it was replaced by Norman French, which also became the literary language of aristocracy and court. The Anglo-Saxon language, which was at this stage developing into Middle English, became the language of the general people or of the lower classes, as I had told you just now. It was only by the 14th century that the status of English language improved and took over French. So, only during the age of Chaucer we will see that English was once again gaining importance. And what was the status of French during the Anglo-Norman period? So, French was the center of attraction, not just French language but also the culture. So, England was to a great extent influenced by both French culture and French language, because during this age you will see that English took or borrowed a lot of French words, and later they became native to English. They became a part of the English vocabulary. So it was the language of court and aristocracy. Therefore, all the literature that was written under the court was produced in French. The court was the place of importance, and whatever was written during this age was mostly in French. Only the writings which were related to religious elements, they were written in Latin. Otherwise, most important works were written in French. Very less English was produced in English. Since French had become the language of the elite and the court, the Anglo-Norman literature of the 12th and 13th centuries included significant works in French. And most of the French works were religious and didactic. What was the status of Latin during the Anglo-Norman period? Again, as I had said you, Latin was a very prestigious language, and it was successful in holding its position as the language of the clergy or the church. Apart from English and French being spoken in England, another significant language during the Anglo-Norman period was Latin. Latin retained its position as the language of the learned clergy. Latin had not been able to dominate during the Anglo-Saxon period, as there were very few people who could speak it. During the Anglo-Saxon age, as English was rising, even the king himself was helping or promoting the translation of different important books, both in prose and poetry, literature, fiction, non-fiction. There was the existence of fiction and non-fiction was not there that time, but he was promoting the translation of various books into the dialects of English language so that more and more people could read it. That's why Latin was less important during the Anglo-Saxon age, but again it had gained its position of prominence back during the Anglo-Norman era. So this has the constant attacks by the Danish and the Vikings impacted Latin learning in England and eventually resulted in the development of vernacular prose during the Anglo-Saxon age. But during the Anglo-Norman period, it gained again importance and was restored as the language of serious didactic literature. So, Latin after French was the most important language. Now, we understood what is the historical background. Till now, what is happening? Since the Anglo-Saxon age only, it is the struggle or it is the run for power. First, you had the Romans who were holding the power over this land. Then you see the Anglo-Saxons. Now it's the Anglo-Normans. So, till the age of Elizabeth, you will not see England being very stable for a long period, because just after this, you will again see the 100 Years' War, which will it will begin from 1337 and it will end only in 1453, when the Renaissance age has almost begun. So you will see that England goes through a lot of transitions and the power structures are frequently changing. Why did the Anglo-Norman age start? Because of the power change. The Anglo-Saxons lost in the Battle of Hastings and they had to give up power to the French people. So when new people are coming, they are changing the entire culture of that particular area or region. So they speak in their language and they talk in their language. This changes the culture and also the literature to a great extent. What type of literature was being produced during the Anglo-Saxon age? We had seen heroic poems, epics to a great extent. We also saw allegorical poems. Now, allegorical poems remain during the Anglo-Norman age, but their pattern changes to a great extent. But you will see a sharp decline in heroic poems, which was very much prevalent during the Anglo-Norman age. Why? That is because the culture of the French is very different from that of the Anglo-Saxons. I know, or I think it will be a very wrong term to call them more civilized, but yes, how were the Anglo-Saxons living? They were living in tribes, and they did not have, or they did not prefer to build permanent homes. They were rather people who would prefer to move from one place to another frequently, and they were very much into warfare. Their war was a bit different from that of the Anglo-Normans. Now their heroism was also very different, and if you note one thing, they were pagans. But these Anglo-Normans, they already have started converting into Christianity. So now we can consider that they are Christians, and they also have their heroism, but in their own way. So one type of literature which is emerging during the Anglo-Norman age is the romances, where you will see the knights and their chivalry. So their heroism is very much different from that of the Anglo-Saxons. So the heroic poems like Beowulf, the great epic of your Anglo-Saxon age, you will not see very good heroic poems during this age. Rather, you will see the romances, different romances. Now, what are these romances? We will talk about these. First, let's see the impact on literature. What were the styles prevalent during the Anglo-Saxon age, which will see a sharp decline during the Anglo-Norman age? We will talk about that first. Then we will talk about the styles which were not there during the Anglo-Saxon age, but they were introduced during the Anglo-Norman age. And after that, we will study about what important works of literature, both poetry and prose, were written during this Anglo-Norman age. So first, what is the impact of this particular age of the Normans on heroic poetry? Unlike alliteration, what is alliteration? I hope you all know what is alliteration. When the first letter is repeated to maintain a rhyme sequence, and this first letter should be a vowel sound. Unlike alliteration, heroic poetry was unable to survive in the medieval ages, and the Anglo-Norman period in English literature saw a decline in heroic verse. So I told you why they saw a decline in heroic verse, because literature is the reflection of whatever is going on in your society. So when your culture changes, then it is also reflected or highlighted in the literature produced during that age. Norman conquest and the French domination through Europe brought an end to the Roman Empire and led to the formation of a new Europe. By the beginning of the 12th century, Europe had become a Christian civilization with its own culture and societal norms. The heroic age that was so particular to the Anglo-Saxon period no longer existed. So the heroism of the Anglo-Saxons no longer existed, and it was replaced by the new courtly sophistication, ideals and manners. So I told you they had their heroism, but their own kind of heroism. In the various romances, you will see knights and the chivalry which they portray. So they had their courtly ideas of romance and ideals and their own sophisticated manners, unlike that of the Anglo-Saxons. With the Middle Ages, Europe no longer remained a heroic society as it used to be. It had transitioned into a feudal society. This is very important. Mark the difference, because right now we are seeing that the NET exam is heading towards a descriptive pattern within the MCQ format. So you need to understand the concept very well. You can get such a question in your statement based questions, or they may also ask you these type of informations in your reasoning and assertion questions. So you need to know that during the Anglo-Saxon age, England was a heroic society, and now the kingship and monarchy is becoming much more prominent. During the Anglo-Saxon era, you had kings, but they were more like people who were living in tribes, moving from one region to another. Now monarchy is becoming stronger and stronger slowly. So the feudal system, feudal society is being established in England during the Anglo-Norman Age. So we see the shift from heroic society to the feudal society. You need to know this. This is very important. With its own protocols regarding honor and service. As we talk about the feudal society, one thing which you should know, that the Magna Carta was originally written by 1215 AD. It was translated into English much later during the 16th century, but originally it was written during the Anglo-Norman Age itself, because you are seeing a feudal society. So somebody needs to talk about the rights of common people. It's not that whatever the king will say, you have to follow or abide by it, even if he is wrong, because he is not the all-powerful. So you have to think about the liberty of the common people, the rights of the common people. So Magna Carta, this is a very, very important information, was published by 1215. It had different literary patronage, social conditions and relation between the opposite genders. So the culture and society of the Anglo-Normans changed to a great extent. That's why your heroic poetry was almost negligible during the Anglo-Norman Age. Even though it was not the Anglo-Norman conquest that brought these changes to England, it definitely acted as a catalyst to these otherwise inevitable changes. So even if the Normans did not come to England, these changes were inevitable. The influence of French was there all over Europe. But when they had a direct power over this land, so the change came earlier and at a greater pace, faster pace. Now, let us see what is the impact of Anglo-Norman culture on the alliteration and oral tradition. Now, one thing we know that during the Old English age, the oral tradition was very much prevalent. Still, people had not taken to that much of writing, and we know that the most of the literature which we can see today from the Old English age are not attributed to any author. We don't know who was the person writing all these things. Most of it is anonymous to us. Even if it is attributed to someone, we are not sure of the authorship. So the oral tradition that was popular among the masses was not impacted by the Norman conquest and the arrival of French aristocracy. Why? Because during the Anglo-Norman age, what did we see? That the common people of England who were speaking in the various dialects of English, they were separated from the ruling class. সাধারণ মানুষের সাথে কোনো ধরনেরই কোনোভাবেই যোগাযোগ ছিল না যারা শাসন করছিল. They were set aloof in their language and in their ways. So the oral tradition which was prevalent among the common people, that was not changed to a great extent. One of the significant changes in the Anglo-Saxon literature was that its alliterative verse tradition was replaced by French rhymed verses. Alliteration was there, unlike heroic poetry, which almost vanished during the Anglo-Norman Age. Alliterative verse was there, but its pattern changed a lot. It was replaced by the French rhymed verses. And it was not till the 14th century that the alliterative poetry revived and regained popularity. The alliteration verses that belonged to the Anglo-Norman literature were simplified and represented the popular oral tradition. This was significantly different from the technically subtle alliterative verses of the Anglo-Saxon literature. So, we know that alliterative verse remained, but its pattern changed to a great extent during the Anglo-Norman Age. So now this was some of the traditions which were there during the Anglo-Saxon Age, like heroic poetry and your oral traditions, alliterations was there in the Anglo-Saxon culture or literature. Now let us talk about the things which were introduced into literature for the first time by the Anglo-Normans. The octosyllabic couplet was introduced by the Anglo-Normans into English literature. It came to English literature from French. So this is a French influence which was there. The influence was on English literature. It was not only used in religious and didactic works and romance, but was used in many other types of poetry. One of the most successful poetry belonging to the Anglo-Norman literature in English that uses octosyllabic couplet is The Owl and the Nightingale. Now this is a very, very important poem from the Anglo-Norman Age. You can say one of the most important poems, and it's ideal if you go through the poem in details. There are some works which needs attention. This is one of them. The Owl and the Nightingale, এই পোয়েমটা এমনই একটা পোয়েম যেটা শুধু সুপারফিশিয়ালি ওপর পড়লে চলবে না. You need to know the story, the pattern and also the themes of this poem, because this is a game changer or first time or sensational bola jay. During the Anglo-Norman era, back in think 12th or 11th century, such a poem was remarkable. The poem was composed around 1200 CE and is the first example of a verse debate. So imagine, during the 1200 era, you have a poem which is in the form of a verse debate in octosyllabic couplet. And what is the debate about? The debate is between two birds and allegorically depicts two ways of life. This poem is very, very important. I am telling you again, please go through the contents of the poem. What is the poem about? Just knowing the name of this poem and that it was from Anglo-Norman era is not enough. The monastic and the secular or for two kind of poetry. তার মানে কি, The Owl and the Nightingale এর গল্পটা কি? এটা একটা ডিবেট ফর্মে আছে গল্পটা, যেখানে দুটো পাখি একে অপরের সাথে ডিবেট বা তর্ক করছে এবং দুজন দু ধরনের মানসিকতাকে রিপ্রেজেন্ট করছে। একজন দ্য সেকুলার ওয়ে অফ লাইফ আর আরেকজন দ্য মোনাস্টিক অর রিলিজিয়াস ওয়ে অফ লাইফ। কোনটা বেটার সেই বিষয়ে ডিবেট করছে, বাট বাই দ্য এন্ড অফ দ্য পোয়েম নোবডি উইন্স ওভার দ্য আদার, মানে এইটার থেকে ওইটা ভালো এটা কিন্তু কোনোভাবেই দেখানো হয়নি, খালি জীবনের দুটো খুবই আলাদা আলাদা দৃষ্টিকোণ দেখানো হয়েছে এবং কোনোটার থেকে কিন্তু বড় করে দেখানো সম্ভব নয়। দ্যাট ইজ দ্য রিজন দিস ইজ আ রিমার্কেবল পোয়েম। প্লিজ আই এম টেলিং ইউ অ্যাগেন, গো থ্রু দ্য পোয়েম ওয়ান্স। The monastic and the secular, or for two kinds of poetry, the amorous and the didactic. Nobody wins the arguments towards the end. Remember this information. It may come in your exam. Nobody wins the argument. the poem gives life to a conventional form and exceptionally paints the owl, the nightingale and the everyday life of the Anglo-Norman period. So it also depicts the everyday life of the Anglo-Norman period. And who are the two birds? One is the owl and the other is the nightingale. Now the owl represents the didactic form of life and the nightingale represents the amorous form of life. Remember this. Without a doubt, the Owl and the Nightingale is an exceptional early Middle English poem. So, one thing we know that from the French came the octosyllabic couplet. What are the most important texts produced during the Anglo-Norman Age? So you have layman's translation of Roman de Brute titled Brute, which also employs alliteration without any rhyme. You have Piers the Plowman, Gawain and the Green Knight. You have Pearl, Patience and Purity. Your Owl and the Nightingale is an important poem. Cursor Mundi is another important poem. So, now again, like the Anglo-Saxon age, the Anglo-Norman age does not produce too many literature. It is not that much remarkable, but still we know the changes, the transitions and also the emerging form of literatures in the English language. Now, just now I was talking about the romances, which is a speciality of the Anglo-Norman age, as you can call it. Now, what do we understand by this? In French, Roman was initially referred to the work written in French language. The Anglo-Norman period in English literature saw the development of romances and courtly tradition in England. Later you will see the sonnets. Even if you see the work of Sidney and Spenser, when Sidney is writing, or the Fairy Queen and all these, you will see this. There is a knight who is very chivalrous. Now, what do we mean by chivalric? He is very brave. He is a very good fighter. He is knight. That means he fights for his country. But when it comes to the lady love, it's today we can say it's pathetic, because if we later see the sonnets, you will see that there is a conventional way of writing, where the lady love is portrayed as somebody ideal and goddess and all these things. Even though he's very brave, in front of the lady love, he is ready to do whatever it is to win her heart. So all these courtly ideals of chivalry. The heroic verses belonging to the Anglo-Saxon literature were stern and dealt with the achievements and lives of heroes who existed in reality. So during the Anglo-Saxon age, realism was portrayed. They too had heroism, but I told you in their own way. But the chivalry of the knights during the medieval ages, which began in the Anglo-Norman age, that was wild imagination, means it is not prevalent in the real world. The way the knights are portrayed and the way they behave in front of the ladies, that's maybe happens in an ideal world only. It's far, far away from reality. On the other hand, romance is escapist and marvelous. Fighting and war and heroic poetry was a grim and necessary affair with a specific purpose, and most often against heavy odds. Moreover, it often led to the death of the honorable and valiant hero. So now you understand what is romance. And this idea of romance is a very French concept of the courtly love of, and the Anglo-Saxon heroism was for everybody. Most of the male people belonging to the Anglo-Saxon tribes, they were fighting. It's not just during, like you see the feudal society in the Anglo-Norman Age, which separates the common people from the ruling class. In Anglo-Saxon Age, nothing like that is there. But during the Anglo-Norman Age, not everybody can become a knight. There is a vast difference between the common man and between a knight, the ruling class. So it is also a significant symbolism for the feudal class, for the feudal society. The lady about whom in most of the cases these knights talk about, they too are no common women in most cases. So it is the reflection of a feudal society where the knight is chivalrous, but again he enjoys all the power in life. He is not a commoner. Now, what are the different romances? There are three major romances. The first one being the matter of France, because we will talk about first the matter of France, because of course this idea of romance is a very French concept, and from France only it came into England. Romance on the matter of France was developed the earliest, as it is when it emerged from France, though it is the earliest. Poems dealing with the matter of France are about King Charlemagne and his knights. The tone of these romances is similar to that of heroic poetry, but again the heroism differs in their very own way. Chasseur-Tirola is a significant example of romance based on the matter of France. It narrates the story of a courageous hero who unfortunately loses in a tough battle and dies. The driving force behind the romances written upon the matter of France was dominance of Christianity and the driving out of Saracen, the European invaders. So one thing which you need to note, another great difference between the Anglo-Saxons and the Anglo-Normans is of their beliefs. In last class we had discussed that these Anglo-Saxons, they were initially pagans and Christianization eventually occurs. But the Anglo-Normans are very much Christians. So of course their beliefs, their culture differs to a great extent. They were also produced and even encouraged by the monks of various monasteries. While on the pilgrim routes, they used to attempt to portray their founders similar one of Charlemagne's heroes in order to garner more patronage. So this is in most cases what is the matter of France all about. You'll always find a knight as the protagonist who is very much chivalric in nature, and he is loyal to his country, of course. Next is your matter of Britain. Romances written about the matter of Britain include the stories about the King Arthur, the mythical stories of King Arthur. I hope you are aware of the Arthurian legends. So, King Arthur is a mythical king, and most of the Middle English, stories which are somehow related to mythology come from here. The story of the Arthurian legends, King Arthur and his people and his knights, as evident in Monmouth's and Layman's Brut. However, these two Anglo-Norman writers were writing histories rather than romances. So, there is a difference between English romance and French romance. They are trying to get influence from French romance, but they in all cases don't become successful. Their romances become more of history rather than romances. These romances about King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, remember, there are King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. We can talk about that in another class in details. And if you are sincere enough, please do your homework and comment down about whatever you collect from different sources about King Arthur. Who was King Arthur and who was the queen whom he married, and from where these knights came? You have to tell that story to me. So this is what the matter of Britain is all about. Next, you have the matter of Rome. Romances based on the matter of Rome elaborated the classical ancient world of Rome as seen from the perspective of the medieval age. These romances did not depict Rome as done by Virgil, Homer or Pericles. The sources of these romances did not belong to the mainstream classical tradition. For instance, the romances based on the story of Troy, the great Trojan War. One thing which you need to know, keep this in mind, as literature students, whoever is preparing for NET, you need to know your classical literature very nicely. What we do generally in literature classes, we start from British history. But even before that, you have your history of Greek and Rome, which we call classical literature, because again in the Renaissance age and again you have the neoclassical age also, reference of the ancient Greek and Roman literature will come again and again. Iliad, Odyssey, Homer, Virgil, all these names should be clear to you. What is the Battle of Troy? Again, we cannot address all these things in this class today. We might talk about these in another separate class. What happened during the Trojan War? Which character is doing what? These things are important for you. Otherwise, you won't relate, because in English literature, you will get Roman and Greek references again and again. And if you are not clear with the concepts, you will not be able to understand what I am saying. So, the matter of Rome has something to do with the ancient Roman culture. So, whenever you are talking about Rome, definitely ancient Rome will come up. You will have references of Troy again and again. You will have references of Iliad and Odyssey again and again. During the Middle Ages, Virgil was popularly considered as a wizard rather than a poet. Thus, romances based on the story of Troy, such as Roman de Troy, were not based on Virgil. So, definitely, you have references from your ancient Greek and Roman literature, but in a very new way, very different way. So, now you can understand that all of these are romances. But French romance, the English romance and the Roman romance, they differ in their own very way. French romances based on the matter of Rome not only documented the Trojan War, but also narrated the story of Troilus and Cressida that was eventually used by English writer. Now, this legendary story of Troilus and Cressida is very important, because you will see the adaptations again and again. You have an adaptation by Shakespeare, you have an adaptation by Chaucer. You need to know all these references. This work is very important. I hope you got an idea what romance is about. If you have any doubt, any question, please do comment, so that if you have some issues, I will explain it once again. So, what did we understand? We talked about the historical background of Anglo-Norman Age. What are the important things going on during this age? Again, we talked about the influence on literature. What is happening? Heroic poems are decreasing. Alliteration is changing. And we see the rise of octosyllabic couplet, which is a French influence. And most importantly, we talk about the romances, which is a very unique feature of Anglo-Norman Age, because romances come from French influences, and we see the French romance, we see English romance, the matter of Britain, and we also see the matter of Rome. Now let us recapitulate once whatever we studied in today's class. What is the key characteristic features of the Anglo-Norman Age? So the dominant language, as you know that French became the dominant language during the Anglo-Norman Age, and it became the language of the court, aristocracy, church, law, causing English to temporarily decline as a literary language. So this decline is only a temporary, because we will see that during the age of Chaucer, English once again gained its position of prominence. Then genre shift. Just now I told you about this. What do we mean by genre shift? The period saw a shift from the alliterative heroic style of Old English to rhymed metrical romances. What are the major themes? Literature focused on chase and digest, means song of heroic deeds, courtly romance, and didactic religious works. Next, you have Arthurian legends. The 12th century saw a boom in Arthurian literature popularized by Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britannia and Wace's Roman de Brute. Influence of religion, didactic literature, and hagiography. What is hagiography? It is lives of saints were highly popular, with works like Ancren Vise written to instruct nuns. So you also have works which are written for religious purpose. Basically, this is what the Anglo-Saxon age is all about, and all these things are very, very important for this age. What are the important works of during which we find during the Anglo-Norman Age? So these are the important prose works. The important prose work. You have Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britannia. Now remember one thing, that this work is written in Latin. Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britannia is written in Latin. Now, Wace's Roman de Brute is a translation, or it's better to say adaptation of Historia Regum Britannia written in French. Written in French. So, Wace is adapting Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britannia written in Latin, and he translates it to French. Again, Layman's Brute is a translation of Wace's Roman de Brute, and Layman writes his Brute in English. These are a few important prose works which were written during the Anglo-Norman Age. And there are a few important poetry from the Anglo-Norman Age as well. What are the important poetry? Most important poetry. What is happening? You have the owl and the nightingale. Owl and the nightingale. After that, you have cursor mundi. What else? You have the pearl poet. Now, the pearl poet is someone who is writing alliterative poems in the Anglo-Norman age. I told you alliterative poems were present both in Anglo-Saxon age and Anglo-Norman age, but the way they are written were changed to a great extent. So you have during the Anglo-Norman age the style is different, and during the Anglo-Saxon age the style is different. So you have pearl, purity and patience. Pearl, purity, patience, written by the pearl poet, and the same author is writing the poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. This is also a very important Middle English poem. Another very important poem. Not possible for me to discuss it today in this class, but of course you need to go through it. It is very important for your UGC-NET English literature. These are a few poems which are very important from the Anglo-Norman age. Yes, of course, you have other poems also. And remember, this time, as your pattern of the NET exam is changing, যেহেতু নেট পরীক্ষার প্যাটার্নটা পাল্টাচ্ছে, সেই জন্য ওপর জাস্ট অ্যাংলো-নরমান এজের হিস্ট্রিটা কি, when the battle of Hastings took place and what are the literary changes, and you just remember the name of the works. This will not help you clear the exam. So especially the poems and the prose which are most important, like I told you about the owl and the nightingale, cursor mundi, pearl, purity, patience, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. এই সবকটা পোয়েমই এতটা important that you need to know the details. You need to know the plot, not the plot, of course, they are poems, what the poem is about, what are the important themes, what is the style of writing. These are all major points which you need to note from these areas. So this is an overview of the Anglo-Norman age in a nutshell. I hope I have addressed all the most important areas which you need to know from the Anglo-Norman era. If you have any questions, any doubts, you may ask. Otherwise, we will end the class over here today. কারোর কোনো প্রশ্ন আছে? If you want to ask, even after the class ends, no problem. অনেক সময় হয় যে we are busy, ব্যস্ততার কারণে লাইভ ক্লাস দেখা হলো না, তো পরবর্তীতেও যদি তোমরা দেখো, কোনো ডাউট থাকে, কোনো প্রশ্ন ডেফিনেটলি করতে পারো। এবং প্রত্যেকটা ক্লাসে যে জিনিসগুলো একটা ক্লাসের মধ্যে কখনোই অ্যাড্রেস করা সম্ভব না সব কিছু, যেই জিনিসগুলো অ্যাড্রেস করা হচ্ছে না বা আমি তোমাদের বলি যে এই জিনিসটা পরবর্তীতে দেখে আসবে বা এটা জেনে তুমি কমেন্ট বক্সে কমেন্ট করবে, সেটা অবশ্যই করবে। তা না হলে কিন্তু কখনোই নেট এক্সামে সাফল্য আসতে পারে না। ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজটাকে ভালোভাবে পড়তে হবে, ভালোভাবে বুঝতে হবে। তো ইফ ইউ লাইকড দ্য ক্লাস ভালো লেগে থাকলে অবশ্যই লাইক করবে এবং বন্ধুদের সাথে শেয়ার করবে, আমি রিপিটেডলি বলি। আর যদি ফার্স্ট টাইম আমাদের চ্যানেল দেখো, প্লিজ চ্যানেলটা সাবস্ক্রাইব করবে। থ্যাংক ইউ।